As far back as I could remember, YEHUDI Menuhin has been a major musical figure on the world stage. So when he visited Montreal in 1965, I was eager to interview him. However, when I called him at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Montreal, he told me his time was very tight and that there was a television crew going to his hotel the next morning at 10:30. Now, I know something about television crews. They have a somewhat superior view of their own importance and are very cavalier with other people's time. So I asked Menuhin whether I could just squeeze in 10 minutes at about 10:15. After all, it was just radio. He immediately agreed, and so next morning I was in his room sharp at 10 past 10, together with my CBC technician and a tape recorder. Menuhin sat cross-legged on the settee, very relaxed, and we started the interview. We had just one 15-minute tape, and at the 14-minute mark, the technician gave me the signal, and I brought the interview to a close. When I left, it was nearly 11 o'clock, and the TV crew had still not arrived. There is one nice anachronism listening to the tape in 2015. Menuhin asserted that China was not producing any string players. Now, 50 years later, this could not be less true. They are producing violinists by the hundreds of thousands, and some of the great violin soloists in the world today are Chinese. I started by asking YEHUDI Menuhin how to pronounce his name.
The name is Menuhin in Russian or Hebrew, Menucha meaning peace in Hebrew. And when my father became an American citizen, he was advised by the judge to make the name a little more easily pronounceable. And instead of having 5 letters, M-N-U-H-A, he inserted another vowel, M-E-N-U, making it a 3-syllable word. Since then, the Russians and Far Eastern peoples still retain the Menuhin or Menuhin, with the accent on the U. And the more Western peoples, as the American continents, pronounce it Menuhin. And being a great, having deep respect for urtext, as I am a musician, going back to the original manuscripts of Bach and the others and respecting every little dot and indication they give, the urtext is Menuhin, and the others are evolutions or corruptions as you look upon it.
So you don't get particularly annoyed when it comes out as Menuhin or Menuhin?
I don't get annoyed. No, Menuhin I don't like. I don't mind Menuhin at all.
How do you like touring now?
Well, in a way more and more, in a way less and less. I like the actual travel less and less. The business of trains and airplanes and the fuss of getting on and off, the numbers of people traveling. Once one is in one of the nice new big jet planes, particularly the VC-10, I'm not on BOAC's payroll, but it is the most beautiful jet today. That is quite comfortable. But what I love is coming back to old friends and old cities that I know. Now almost every part of the world can fill that description. And when I come to Montreal or New York or Chicago, it is coming back to places I know, to audiences I know, and to people and friends I know. That part of it is very pleasant. But I think as the years roll by, I will be playing more concerts only in those places that I already know, and probably will not venture to the places I don't.
About how many appearances are you making a year now?
Now only about 100, I would say, roughly.
I ask the question because one gets the impression that you seem to be going more to teaching and less to playing.
Well, no. People generally draw quick conclusions, you know. It is true that I'm doing a little more teaching than I ever did before. For one thing, I never taught until I felt I had something that I wanted to impart or that I felt I could help others. And this I've only begun in recent years. Now I do give a little time when I'm in London to my school, but it has not as yet curtailed my concert activities or my recording. I do much more recording than I used to. I do much more television, many BBC programs every year. I have my festivals in Bath and Gstaad, so that I'm actually doing many more things than I used to.
On the subject of teaching children, at what age do you like your pupils to start? Or what age do you like to get your hands onto them?
I'd like to get my hands onto them as early as possible. I wouldn't mind if I had my hands on them at 3. But unfortunately, it's impractical in the school we have to handle that wide range of age. We couldn't handle 3 to 16. So we have compromised on 8 to 15. And we take them on at 8.
What do you find the most difficult thing to teach children on the violin?
It is to look upon it as something, to look upon an art which is contrived, if you will, as something entirely natural. It must become natural. And the problem with the violin is that it's a long road between the ideal and the practice. Too often it's a discouraging road, which is the reason why there are so few violinists and less violinists taking up the instrument. I mean, musicians or children taking up the instrument. The only countries that show the opposite evolution are Russia and Japan. I don't know about China. Today I don't believe that China is encouraging Western music in a great deal. But certainly Russia and Japan are. And in those countries the numbers and the possibility of every kind of advancement, of emancipation, is still very limited. And therefore, as with all peoples who haven't an easy road to self-expression, music comes first, as it does to the Negroes in the southern United States and to the Jews in Russia, and the Gypsies, and so on.
Since you learned to play the violin, have there been any really big advances in teaching methods?
I couldn't say, because the Russians, who are producing some of the most brilliant violinists today, are still using the excellent hour method of teaching. I don't think, in fact, we do not have today the great teachers that we had in as great, shall we say, as hour or flesh. We have some very good teachers, but that is precisely my desire and the reason why I've started the school, which I certainly wouldn't have added to my undertakings had I felt that it was in a healthy condition, that violin teaching and playing were adequate. They are not adequate. The fact is, all over the world, the orchestras are finding it more and more difficult to staff their bodies, and I feel that in this respect I could contribute something, but it is not for me to speak about my method, as it were. I'd rather take the cautious road and wait until one of these children 5 or 6 years hence may justify it.
I was thinking when I asked that question of the Karl Orff method of teaching.
Well, that's not teaching the violin.
No, but that's
teaching music, which has many advantages. It is a very good method. I've seen it demonstrated, and it has some. It does induce a spontaneous feeling about music, which is so necessary for the child to feel, as they do already in painting. Painting has advanced much more quickly than music, because it seems more easy, more direct. The impulse is immediate from the imagination onto the canvas or to the paper, whereas through the instrument it is much more difficult, all the more so as the violin is often taught in a very dry and old-fashioned way, and you're supposed to play little pieces to begin with, little pieces that are usually horrid and out of tune and insufferable. It's a very difficult problem.
You mentioned the difficulty orchestras are now finding staffing their orchestras, staffing their chairs. I've been reading too that the main scarcity is with string players.
Oh yes, there is no scarcity of winds.
Can you blame people for not wanting to take up music when they read of great orchestras, especially recently the London orchestras, having difficulty finding funds to keeping themselves going?
Well, I think that is a passing phenomenon. I'm sure that with the advance of the teaching of music, with the continuously rising standard of the education, the culture, the aesthetic background of the aesthetic awareness of the population, the new cities, the new communities, the breaking up of the large cities into smaller units, we will see a great need shortly, a demand for many more orchestras, concert halls, theatres, operas, and all. We won't be satisfied with a few orchestras in the major cities and one main opera house in a vast country. That's a thing of the past. So that we live in an interim period when the private support of the orchestras is giving way. Corporate support, corporate bodies, industry is picking up the tag to a certain extent, but it will fall mainly, I think, eventually on public funds, probably. At least sufficient public funds to guarantee permanence to the institution.
But the life of a musician is still far from secure, and
yes,
with the
I
new
know.
affluence...
I know, but you see, there again, the whole accent on security alone is a false one. None of the violinists who studied the violin and are now studying it in Russia and Japan have the assurance of success or economic security. There is the promise, yes, if they do get into an orchestra in Russia, there they are secure, just as they are in Germany, where they are considered part of the Beamte class. They belong to officialdom. They get their regular pay and their pension and their family and so on. But there must be something more to the man who craves to play the violin. There must be something more. It's not quite sufficient. It doesn't answer all the requirements to say that the future is not guaranteed. He must first of all want to play the violin and love it. And that I found in every musician. Even the most battered of orchestra musicians is still housing the original spark somewhere, and it can be released.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to the subject of repertoire, does the concert violinist have an increased choice of material available? Have there
Yes.
been any really important works?
Oh yes. Each generation, as it were, brings more. Perhaps I'm a little, as I will be 50 next year, I may sound a bit old-fashioned to speak of Bartók and Schoenberg, but there are even more modern composers around. But these occur to me simply because just yesterday, the day before yesterday, I was recording with Glenn Gould, Fantasy of Schoenberg, and on a television program for CBC, incidentally, and and I've been doing, as you know, quite a lot of Bartók. In fact, all his works for violin, and in fact, he wrote Sonata for Violin alone for me. I think it was his penultimate work in 1944. Then there are composers. I've commissioned quite a few works. I'm playing in Chicago a work by Odeon Partos, a Hungarian-Israeli composer, of which I gave the first performance in Tel Aviv last summer. I think it's a remarkable work, very, very colorful, full of wild orchestration, a great deal of percussion, and beautifully written for the violin. That is, I think, a very good work, which hasn't yet been heard in this country, unless it was put on radio from the tape I made last year. And then, as I've been living in England quite a lot recently, we've commissioned for the Bath Festival quite a few works. A trio of Alan Rawsthorne. Malcolm Arnold wrote a concerto for two violins, which I've played with the orchestra, with the concertmaster Robert Masters, who leads my little band. And Arnold Cook, what's his name? Peter Maxwell Davis. And then the United States, I played Sonata for Violin Alone of Rossley Finney, 12-tone work, and so on. I mean, I'm all the time learning. Oh, just a few weeks ago, I played the first performance of an Australian composer, Malcolm Williamson, in the Commonwealth Arts Festival. And we're always deciphering new pieces.
So the choice is increasing.
Choice is increasing, not only though in the contemporary direction, but also in the other direction. And more of the incredibly beautiful music written Purcell and Dowling and other ancient music of the Middle Ages is coming to light, and that is another field which didn't exist. The musicologists have given us a great deal of music which we would not have had were it not for the patient poring over manuscripts in museums and old monasteries and so on.
Mm-hmm. One last question. I've noticed in my own observations that many conductors started out as violinists. Have you ever had any tendencies that way towards conducting?
Well, I do a little conducting now. I don't call myself a conductor because I don't think that I am a conductor, but I do enjoy working with my colleagues and working on compositions which otherwise I would have no chance of performing. And that I find an enormous satisfaction and a very great stimulus. We've done a great many recordings of contemporary works, Bartók and Hindemith, Britten, not to speak of many recordings of Purcell, Haydn, Mozart, Bach, Handel, and so on and so forth.
Rather than leaving the playing.
Oh yes, no, I wouldn't leave my playing.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Menuhin, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you.